You're going to learn a lot. And I am really looking forward to hearing Sharona again on this really incredible and fascinating site that has recently been restored and uncovered. So welcome to everyone. People are still joining with us, but I'm going to give it over to you, Sharona, into your capable hands. And please lead us onwards. Thank you.
And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in your different locations on the globe and different hours. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity. Tour guides in Israel and around the world are mostly unemployed today. And tour guiding is not something we only do for income. It's what we are. We love talking. We love showing our wonderful land here in Israel and everywhere else. This is what we do. This is what we are. And you are giving me the chance. So thank you very much. And it's super exciting today to virtually go to Magdala. As David said, it is a relatively new site. The Holy Land, by definition, has many, many ancient sites, traditional sites. People have been going to certain churches and certain sites for ages and ages. And this is a relatively new discovery, and it's a new site on the tourist map of Israel. So let's first of all introduce ourselves to the place, Magdala. In Hebrew, we call it Migdal, which means a tower. It's on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, this map that I took, most of the photos here are taken from the website of Magdala, and it is a Christian site. If it were a Jewish site, it would say Lake Kinneret. That's the Hebrew name, that's our local name of this very small, relatively unimpressive lake that famous lake in the world because it is the lake where Jesus was most active. In the 3 years that he was a public figure, most of these 3 years were around this area between Kfar Nahum, Korazim, Genosar. This was most of his activity. Most of what's written in the 4 Gospels happened around here, and then the last week in Jerusalem, of course. So today there is a Jewish settlement called Migdal right around here, which preserves the ancient name from 2,000 years ago. Maybe Migdal is actually short for Migdal Nunya, which means a fish tower. Not only a tower, but a fish tower. Nun is the word for fish in Aramaic, which is the language that was mostly used in the Galilee in the time of Jesus. Not Hebrew as we use today, but Aramaic. So this connects the place, maybe Migdal, maybe tower, because it was on a junction. You see here the 2 different roads. Until today, there is a very important junction of roads over here. So maybe it was a place with some kind of fortification. And fish, because it mostly, most of the income here came from the fishing industry. And even in Greek, the name Tarichei means in Greek the place where you salt fish. And the salted fish from here reached the most precious tables of Rome at that time. And of course, in the Christian tradition, this is the birthplace of Mary of Magdalene. Okay? Luke chapter 8, Mary of Magdalene is mentioned sort of on the way with other women, with Joanna, with Susanna, and many others. Specifically, it is said about her that 7 demons were taken out of her. The difference between Mary of Magdalene and all the other women, they're mentioned only once, some of them, as you see, without a name at all. And Mary Magdalene is mentioned afterwards 11 more times. Most importantly, she was the first one to witness the resurrection and bring the news about the resurrection to everybody else, and which makes her very, very special. Now, David and I set the date for this lecture, looking at our calendar, looking at our diaries, seeing what's most preferable with our schedule, not realizing that tomorrow, July 22nd, at least in the Catholic world, it is the day dedicated to Mary. So some kind of Holy Spirit might have guided us to choose this specific day. I was surprised to find it as I was making the presentation. It was always a day dedicated to her, but it was in a lower level of festivity. And as you see from 2016, only 4 years ago, this day was elevated to the general calendar to the level of a feast day. In the Eastern churches, they will celebrate this day on the 4th of August. They will call it July 22nd. It's because of the differences between the Gregorian and the Julian calendar. So I think it's quite exciting that totally by accident, we chose this day to speak about Magdala. The story begins in 2009. Father Juan Solana, who was an appointee from the Pope in the land of Israel, decided that he wants to build another hotel, sort of like the Notre Dame that we have in Jerusalem, north of the old city, just next to the walls of the old city in Jerusalem. A similar place, a place of leisure and spiritual experience along the Sea of Galilee. And he buys a piece of land and he wants to start building the hotel. This is the coastline, this is the lake, and he wants to start building the hotel in this area. Now in Israel, before you start building anything, whether it's a building or a road, or you dig for a water channel or an electricity infrastructure, whatever it is, you have to have mandatory archaeological survey to make sure that you don't destroy antiquities underneath. And what happened here is, as they did the mandatory survey, they discovered here in this section, in this square here, an ancient synagogue from about 2,000 years ago. Now, if it were other people, other bodies, they would say, let's cover it up as quickly as possible. Let's hope that what we find is of lesser importance. Let's hope it's something that is very usual, so we can cover it up after the mandatory digging. In this case, Father Juan Solano was very, very excited, and he hoped to find something of significance, of importance, and this exceeded all of his hopes. And thankfully, he was flexible enough and excited about the findings that he moved the plans of the hotel, and the hotel is not now being built in this section here, allowing the excavations to be exposed as an archaeological garden for all of us. So then they continued digging and found all around here a complete Jewish town from the 1st century, with homes, with streets, with shops, and with a port. The coastline at that time, the time of Jesus, was around here, not as you see here today, and they found the complete city. The city continues further beyond the piece of land that Juan Solano has bought. Okay, so this is the synagogue, and the amazing thing is that as you begin digging, you find the findings of 2,000 years ago. It's not as a regular archaeological mound that has many, many, many layers, and you first have to go through the Middle Ages and then go back to the Byzantine time and then go back to the Roman time. There was one layer, and as you start digging just underneath the surface, you get to the town, which was of the 1st century of 2,000 years ago. Now, this is the layout of the synagogue. These are the foundations of the walls. They had corridors outside. These are seatings. These are benches. Synagogues in ancient times, and we know it from other ancient synagogues that were found in Masada, in Gamla, and other places. The seating was like a community house. It was a place of meeting, a place of gathering. That's what the word synagogue comes from the ancient Greek, and it means a place of community, a place of gathering. It doesn't mean a place of worship or prayer or ritual. So we know that from other synagogues of that period. Now, if we look at Matthew chapter 4, we can see that Jesus traveled around synagogues in the area of the Galilee. The name Migdal is not mentioned here. Migdal, Magdala, it's not mentioned, but not every settlement had enough money for a synagogue. This is a big community effort. The community has to be quite wealthy in order to build a synagogue. So we know there was one in Kfar Nachum, and we know there was one in Kolazim, but not every place. So if we talks about synagogues in plural, and it's so close to where he was active, it is most probably, we cannot say it 100%, but we can be quite sure that he also taught in this synagogue. Although the script doesn't say so specifically, the general saying is close enough so we can surely assume that Jesus was here. And in the center of the synagogue, they found this stone. Okay? Coins that were found right underneath the foundations are from the year 29, which gives us an exact dating. It means the synagogue was there exactly, and it was brand new and exciting, exactly in the years that Jesus was active in that precise area. Okay. Now, I copied this, as I said, from the website of Magdala. So they, of course, are quite excited of saying that this is one of the most significant findings in the last 50 years. I would like to add a grain of salt there. There's the tomb of Herod. There is the stone that has the name of David on it that was found in Dan. There are other very, very exciting findings in the last 50 years. I would definitely put this in the top 10. Okay, I'm not underestimating it. I'm not minimizing it. But to put it as number one, that's arguable, but definitely top 10 findings. Okay, before we dig in deeply to the stone itself, just the surrounding of the synagogue, just to show you how wealthy the community was. You see they had decorated mosaic floors in the corridors around the seating area, and you see that the walls were painted in fresco. Now we have to understand, in the first century, this was a province of Rome. We had a few artists in Israel, fresco and mosaic artists, but not many. And it was very expensive to bring the different pigments, to bring all the different stones, to lay them out. You had to learn it. And this is a large mosaic floor. This is a few meters, and it continued on beyond what we see today. It's a long, expensive job, again, showing us the wealth of this community, and we'll be going back to it later on. So, going back to the stone, what was this stone about? Probably most researchers agree that it was some kind of table to lay the Torah scroll on. We have to remember that 2,000 years ago, books were not the way we hold them today. They were not pieces of paper bound together, but they were a very, very long scroll made of animal hide with two rolling pins in the middle. It was quite big and quite heavy. It's not something that you hold in your pocket or hold in your hands or hold on your lap as you're reading. It has to have a pedestal. So if you can see here in the center, again, this picture is taken from the Magdala website. You can see here this person kneeling, and the stone is on the ground. That is one suggestion. Another suggestion that it might have had wooden legs and it stood taller and a person could read from the Torah while standing up. both suggestions seem very logical to me. Okay? And the most exciting thing, when you go and look at the decorations and you examine each side that is decorated, what the researchers, the conclusion they reached, that this is a small model of the second temple, the temple in Jerusalem. Now let's go in and see. The side that was facing Jerusalem, the side that was facing south as they found it, the center of it has the 7-arm candelabra, the menorah, which was one of the most, if not the most, important artifacts inside the temple. This was always lit, this candelabra. It was made out of gold. There are many descriptions of it in our holy scriptures, the Mishnah, the oral law of Judaism, also in the writings of Josephus. Now, this is the most important artifact in the temple. It was lit only with pure olive oil. Maybe these two amphoras on the side explain that to us. It is expensive, unique, high quality olive oil. Now, it looks as if the menorah is standing on some kind of stage. That could be, or maybe this arch that we see between the two pillars, as if we are peeking into the depth of the temple. The first thing, and we know that from the scriptures, the first thing is a specific table with the holy bread on it, and behind it is the menorah, the candelabra. So maybe what we're seeing is the perspective that the menorah is further in the depth of the building. Now notice here that the candelabra, the menorah, has 3 legs, okay? And that resembles a wall drawing that was found in Jerusalem, in the Jewish quarter, in a site called the Herodian Quarter. We're talking about very luxurious mansions of what we believe to be priest families from the same time, from the 1st century, from the last decades of the Second Temple. Now, if these people lived in Jerusalem, very close to Temple Mount, definitely if they were priests and they served in the temple, they saw the menorah. And they also portrayed it with 3 legs like this. So these two correspond with each other. On the contrary, on the Titus Arch in Rome, where the Romans depict all the artifacts that they looted from the temple and they took at the end of the first revolt in the year 70, we see here sort of a triangle or 3-layer base of menorah. Did the artist here actually see it? We're not sure. I'm sorry about the cats. Okay, I hope it doesn't bother me too much. Probably not. Probably the artist who did the Titus Arch in Rome was told, and he drew this picture. Now, funny enough, today this is the emblem of the state of Israel. Because when the state was founded in 1948, of course, we haven't had this and we haven't had this. And this is very symbolic. When the Romans destroyed the temple and sent us to exile, and they decided to depict it by taking the menorah away, 2,000 years later, 1948, the establishment of the modern state of Israel, we symbolically bring the menorah back, and that is the emblem of the state. Probably the menorah looked much more like one of these two over here. Okay? The 2 sides are like the sides of the building. Now, the building was quite wide, and therefore it needed a few rows of pillars. We have to remember that in Israel, we do not have very, very long beams of wood. We don't have the wood like in Europe, like in North America. We have to import cedar from Lebanon. So in order to make a very wide ceiling, you have to support it in the middle with more pillars. So this is what you see here. It's like a 3-dimension. You see, these are the outside pillars. And looking through the arcade, we see the inside pillars. And again, we have some kind of indication what side the menorah is on. These are like small domestic oil lamps. You see it over here as well. That shows us this is the side where the menorah is. And going to the back side of the stone, this is quite interesting. And what we see is what looks like two stars or flames of fire. That is the most common understanding of it. And two wheels. We have to understand at the very, very back, at the very inside of the temple, during the first temple period, was the Ark of the Covenant with the Ten Commandments. That disappeared. That is lost. Nobody knows, maybe Indiana Jones, you know, but we don't know, really scientifically know where it is. So in the second temple, the very back room was empty. There was no artifact in it. But according to faith, of course, there was the Spirit of God. And symbolically, it was represented by a chariot of fire. And the chariot of fire is mentioned in the prophecy of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the prophet that gives us some condolences, gives us some optimism after the first temple is destroyed and we are exiled to Babylon. He is the one that gives us prophecies about going back to the land of Israel, rebuilding our state, rebuilding our temple. And he describes the holiest of holies with a chariot of fire. So this probably relates to that. Remember the name Ezekiel? We'll go back to it very, very shortly. What's left is the top. The centerpiece of the top is this rosetta that has 6 petals inside and 6 petals surrounding it, altogether 12. Of course, 12 has many, many meanings. It's the 12 tribes. And in the temple itself, the 12 tribes are represented by 12 loaves of bread. Remember the table with the bread that stood in front of the menorah? So maybe, perhaps, these are these 12 loaves of bread, or just representing directly the tribes or anything else having to do with 12. What else do we have here? We have these heart shapes. Now, probably 2,000 years ago, hearts were not used as we use them today, you know, on Valentine's Day, or to show our love and affection. But architecturally, we know from that period that there were pillars that we call them today heart-shaped. Such heart-shaped pillars were found in Masada and in other Herodian age sites all around Israel. So maybe this shows us the inside of the temple that had heart-shaped pillars. And what else we see here are these two drawings on both sides that could be understood in 2 different ways. Some people say that these look like palm trees, which does make sense because palm trees were a symbol of Israel. You can see it on Roman coins when Rome destroyed the temple and it issued coins, Judah Capta, we captured Judea. It's underneath a palm tree. And you see it in Jewish coins as well of the same period. This is a symbol of the state. So that's one understanding. Another understanding is that it might be a fire pan, an artifact used in the temple for cleaning and sorting and taking care of the different altars. There was an altar of essence and an altar for sacrifice. And this is a very, very useful tool. And then in a different part of Magdala, in the port, different archaeologists 2016 actually found a fire pan. And this is quite exciting how in one side of the site we see a pictorial representation of something and then we find the real artifact. And this is quite rare. It's not the only one in Israel. About 10 different fire pans were found in different sites in Israel along the years, but finding it specifically here, it is quite exciting. So this is after it was already cleaned and cleared, and I need to give the authority of antiquities the credit for this photo. Now, so the height, the peak, the golden age of Magdala is around the 1st century, around the time of Jesus, where they completed their synagogue, which was very, very decorated. And they were making money from selling the fish, which we will return to very shortly. But shortly after that, 4 decades after that, the great revolt of the Jews against the Roman, and it begins in the Galilee, and gradually took 4 years until the Romans suppressed it from north to south, from the Galilee towards Jerusalem, and then finally at Masada. And one of the most heroic fights, the heroic battles, was in Migdal, in Trichi. While Tiberius surrendered, while other cities surrendered, Trichi, Migdal, had a battle that began on land and then continued on the water. And a whole fleet was sunk and lost in the water. And Josephus, the historian, tells us that the terrible description of the Sea of Galilee being red at the end of this battle because of all the bloodshed. And Magdala is thus destroyed and never rebuilt again, at least not in the same intensity, not in the same magnitude. There were a few houses here, maybe another house there, a Byzantine, very small church, but mostly the settlement was not covered again. And that is why we don't have a layer upon layer upon layer like we see in other sites in Israel. And as we scrape the surface, we reach this, this town in Jesus' time. So this is the photo we used to advertise this lecture, an aerial view of the site 2 or 3 years ago. This is what used to be the ancient water line, the line of these trees. So this photo was taken, as I said, 2 or 3 years ago after a row of 5 years of drought, and the water is very, very far away. This year, actually, parallel to bad winter with Corona, we actually had a blessed winter with rain, and the lake actually reaches this point, which is very important because here is where they found the remains of the ancient port. As you see in this picture, the port right next to this tree line over here, which totally makes sense. This is the archaeological park where they found the streets and the markets and the houses. As you can see here, we will soon expand on each one of them. This is where the synagogue is, which we just spoke about. And across the street from the synagogue are the mikvaot, the ritual baths, and the modern church that Father Juan Solana established there, Dukin Antum. We'll be going back to each one of these items very shortly. Just want you to notice from the air that this church has a main chapel, which is closest to the water, and it has a four side chapels over here. So remember that, and we'll be going back to that later. So across from the synagogue, quite close, 4 ritual baths were found. In Hebrew, 1 mikveh, many mikvaot in plural. They were found 2 on one side of the street and then 2 on the other side of the street. Now, in Judaism, there is a difference between being clean and being pure. You can scrub yourself for 12 hours and be spotless clean and not be pure if you did not do this scrubbing in the correct basin. A mikveh has to be in a very, very specific size. You have to enter it going down steps, or it could be a natural source of water, a river or a lake or a spring. The water at a mikveh has to be Maim Chaim, we say in Hebrew, water of life. It has to come directly from rain or directly from a natural source without us humans helping, without us pulling the water up. Okay, so it has to come there naturally by gravity. So in most cases all around Israel where mikvot were found, there is a very complicated drainage system, making sure to gather rainwater or fresh water from a river or a spring and bring it to the ritual baths. Here, it is a very unique case where the bath was filled with underground. It is so close to the lake that if you dig deep enough, the underground water basin, the underground water level reaches the bottom of the mikveh and brings it water of life from the bottom and not from the top. That is quite unique. Now, it is special to find so many mikvot, four, so close to each other and so close to a synagogue in the Galilee. We find mikvaot close to each other in Jerusalem, where many priests lived. But apparently, priests did not live only in Jerusalem, mostly in Jerusalem, but not only. Why do they need mikvaot more than others? When do you need a mikvah? When do you need a ritual bath to become pure? After you touch the dead. For women, after giving birth and after menstruating, every time after you touch blood, you have to purify yourself, and before going to the temple. So most people need it a few times in their lives. Women need it once a month. Priests need it on a daily basis. If you need it on a daily basis and you're rich enough, you don't go to a public bath. You have one inside your home. Okay, it's a symbol of status, and it's also a matter of practicality and the comfort of living. If you have several shifts a week in the temple, you don't want to always go to a public bath. So these are the baths that were found in Jerusalem, in the Herodian quarter, in the houses that we believe were priests. So it looks like context is the same. And very close to the ritual bath in Magdala, we see again mosaic floors, showing us that the people living there had not only community wealth, but their own personal wealth. Their houses were rich as well. Which priests lived in Magdala? There were 24 shifts of priests. Each shift served about 2.5 weeks in the temple. That gives us almost or approximately 1 year. Now we have the names of the shifts, we have their number, and we have where they lived in ancient Jewish scripts. And the 19th shift of priest is, or the 20th, is Yechezkel, Ezekiel. Now this is, again, a coincidence. The fact that the shift of Ezekiel actually lived in Migdal, we know that for sure. And then the description of the holy site, the holiest of holies, is from a vision of prophet Ezekiel. It's a very, very nice coincidence, or not coincidence, a very nice combination of facts. Going on to the market, how do we decipher what a market is? If you have a street and then you have a row of rooms all parallel to each other and a door from the street leading to this one room, and that's it. There's no continuation. There's no other rooms connecting to that house. Exactly like walking in the street today or in the mall today, every door leading to one room selling you something. Most of the fish that was dug in Magdala, or at least a big sum of it, was salted in order to preserve it, remember times without refrigerator, and export it around the Roman world, all around the Mediterranean. But there were some people who wanted to buy fresh fish. How fresh? Live fish. Not that you fished an hour ago and it died. I want to buy it live. So many of these shops actually had basins of water in it, very similar to the mikveh in the fact that they were deep enough to reach the underground water. And the fish that was caught was put in these basins, and you could choose your live fish directly from there. So you had the preserved salted fish and the day's catch displayed for the customers. So this is another picture of the market area given to me by a tour guide friend. Thank you, Wailam Khan. And we reached the port. One of the most important parts of Magdala, where the livelihood came from, where all the fishing was done. Now, in a different part of Magdala, a part that is beyond the territory that Juan Solana bought, there's a Franciscan compound there. In the 1970s, this mosaic floor was found, which is quite symbolic. So probably the continuation of the port area is in that area. And Josephus, we're going back to the last battle, mentions 230 boats. We don't know if that's the true number. Josephus tended to exaggerate here and there. But even if he exaggerated times 10, and there were 23 boats, that's quite a fleet for 2,000 years ago. So again, a picture of what was found of the port area just next to the tree line, just next to the ancient water line. And these are artifacts that were found all around the port and the market. Metal artifacts, you can see the size of the artifacts by these rulers here, and many of them have to do with fishing. You see these hooks having to do with the fishing. You see these weights or these sinking weights. And these, this and this, are weights not for the net itself, but for gauging how deep the water is. Because different fish live in different depths of water. And for the fisherman to know where to throw its net at all, he has to know the depth of the water. So these are artifacts. If you go to a modern fishing store today, you will still find the sinking depth, weights, and these weights, the gauging weights and the hooks, and of course anchors. And what's amazing, in another site around the Sea of Galilee, a different site, not Magdala, this stone was found with, it's the mold. In order to make all these metal artifacts that the fishers need. So it's a whole industry. It's not only the fishing, but also the supporting industries around it. I suppose some of the shops there, you had people that made nets and fixed them. So it's a whole industry, and the people there were rich in effort. The same room where the fire pan was found, they also found this vase, which looks quite ordinary at this point. This is the moment where they found it. Again, thank the Authority of Antiquities for the photo. And after they cleaned it and turned it around, look at the handle. This is what it looks like. It's a leg of a woman. You see here the knee and the foot, the leg of a woman. A very, very unique finding. Going to today's church, today's Catholic church, Duke in Antum. Despite the fact that it's Catholic, Juan Solana built it in such a way that people of all denominations feel comfortable to go into it. So you have Greek Orthodox, and you have Russians, and you have Protestants and Baptists coming to the site because of its importance and so on, and also going into the church because it's so amazing, it's so beautiful, and they feel, for instance, there are no sculptures. There are mosaic floors. This is my son just came in, and I'm telling him to be quiet. Sorry about that. Okay, so the main chapel with a big window towards the lake is dedicated to the name of the church, Duken Amtum. Duken Amtum, which means put out into the depth of the water. Okay? And it's a matter of faith in Jesus. They did not manage to succeed in their fishing the whole day. And yet he tells them to go in again, once again, into the depth, and they do it. And this time they succeed, and it's their faith in them. And the uniqueness about this chapel is the boat altar. And even when the sea is low, like it was 2-3 years ago, it looks as if the boat is actually on its way to go into the depth. Definitely nowadays, when the sea is high, when we had a good winter, the effect is absolutely perfect. If you remember, there are 4 side chapels. Each chapel is dedicated to a different story and a mosaic wall to help us understand which story it is. And you see that 3 of the stories have to do with the surrounding area, walking on the water, making the fishers into fishers of men, turning regular people, regular fishermen into disciples, and of course, the meeting of Jesus with Mary of Magdalene and turning and taking the demons out of her. Only this one is not connected directly to this area and to the surrounding. Excuse me, just one second. בנטל, צא מהמטבח, לא עכשיו. ממש לא, תתאפק. Sorry about that. And I would like to enlarge this picture because we are celebrating Mary Magdalene here in this site and tomorrow on this day. And what we see here in this beautiful mosaic is her transformation. Okay, the bottom part of the body still shows us the old Mary of Magdalene, the one that has the demons in her. And as she's being touched by Jesus, she is turning to the holy woman that we celebrate today. You see by the garments that, okay, and we can imagine like an animation how it started with the cap and slowly going down her body. And if the picture was taken a few minutes later, we would not see these rags anymore, and we would see this pink, majestic dress flowing all the way down to the bottom. And if you can count, you can see the demons coming out of her. There's one over here, okay, the snake, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So very, very appropriate to the story of the place. And going downstairs to the bottom of the church to what would be the crypt, and it's dedicated to another encounter that Jesus had, again, around the Sea of Galilee. And what's interesting about this chapel, I'm going to ignore the picture at the moment, is the floor. Because what they did here, they excavated and they reached the archaeological level. So when you go down to the bottom chapel, and you're stepping on this floor here, you're stepping on the same floor that people 2,000 years ago, maybe Jesus himself, his disciples, Mary of Magdalene, actually stepped on this floor here. And paying tribute, giving respect to the ancient synagogue. See the seating here, all around, benches, like a community center. Okay, so it corresponds and it takes inspiration from the ancient synagogue, which I think is absolutely beautiful, how different cycles flows up. Now I see that some people raised their hand during the presentation, and I couldn't relate to it then. So now I am opening the screen, and if any of you want to, will there be time for questions? So yes, this is the time. So if you raise your hand or say in the chat that you would like to be unmuted, so this is the time. Anyone?
I'd like to make a comment, if I may, while people are thinking perhaps. Um, First of all, I want to thank you, Sharona.
Pleasure.
You are really a gifted tour guide. And I would like to also, I read today in the paper that Israel is hoping, perhaps after the fall, to reopen for tourists to come and visit.
We're
So
definitely hoping.
yeah, Bezrat Hashem, God willing.
Yes.
So I'd like to, encourage. Sharona would be a wonderful person to guide a tour. If you'd like to come to Israel, perhaps Sharona, you could make a way for people to get in touch with you somehow.
Okay.
How could people do that?
Okay, so I am on Facebook. I have a personal page and a business page. They're both named Sharona Liman. If people noticed in the presentation, I had sites and hikes written down here on the bottom left side of the screen. So that's also the name of my business page on Facebook. And I also gave at the very last slide my phone number and my.
You want to put that back up a second for us?
Yes, I will put not this one, this one. Here, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so you have my phone number, my mail, and my Facebook. And I would love to be in touch with you. And also, if people would like, I'd love it to guide you, but if people just want advice and guidance how to tour on your own, you're most welcome to ask me as well.
So maybe unshare your screen there, Sharona, so we can see all the folks. Thank you.
So,
yeah, one of the things that I got out of this lecture, and boy, you really pack a lot in there, and it's wonderful. I learned a lot of things, and this idea of Ezekiel's chariot of fire and the wheels, I had never heard that before, as representing the Holy Spirit. Fascinating, something really to think about. I'm going to go back and look at the prophecies in Ezekiel, and maybe get a better perspective on that.
In Hebrew, it's Merkevet Esh.
Merkevet Esh, Barur.
Okay.
Barur. Elijah went up into heaven on a Merkevet Esh, on a chariot of fire. And the other thing that came that I never really thought about before, we talked about Magdala as being a well-to-do town. I mean, they had industry going on there. There was a lot going on there. It was wealthy enough to have a synagogue. And, generally when I think about Jesus or Yeshua and the Sea of Galilee, you think about, country people, small fishing villages, not a lot of crowds, not a lot of people. So it's very interesting to think about Jesus being right in that area. I mean, how far is Capernaum up the coast from Magdala?
A couple of miles.
Yeah.
Just a few miles, not a couple, maybe 4 or 5 miles. Walking distance.
5 miles. Yeah, short,
absolutely walking distance.
A short hike.
Yes.
So, to think about Jesus being, he was in that area and even teaching in that synagogue and being part of, what was almost a large town, or almost maybe it wasn't a city, but an active town. That was very interesting. And also interesting to think that it's most likely that many of his followers who were part of that region would have come from that place. And of course, the other thing also, how fascinating to find that we call it a temple stone, or that they call it a Magdala stone, which represents the temple in the synagogue. And of course, for those of us that you're speaking with here today, Sharona, are very interested in the Jewish roots of the New Testament faith, and put that into perspective of Jesus being in this synagogue and the connection with the temple, the connection with the priests, the connection with the ritual baths, and all of his life really centering around that whole area right there.
We really have to remember that Jesus himself, all of his disciples, all the people that lived around the Sea of Galilee at that time were Jews and considered themselves as Jews. He did not consider himself as beginning a new religion, maybe fixing it from within, like it said in Matthew 9 and the Beatitudes. But so he had a lot of criticism from inside, but from inside, he was born and lived and died as a Jew. That's how he considered himself. Right. So a synagogue would be a natural place for him. He went to a synagogue in Nazareth. He went to a synagogue in Fan Nahum in Chorazim. That would be a natural place. And as we said, the synagogues were a place of studying Torah together, of meetings, of gatherings, of community. It wasn't a place of ritual and prayer as we know it today. It evolved to it afterwards.
That was a very interesting point as well. I also know that the word synagogue means gathering together. And yeah, it's a beautiful picture from the life of times of Jesus of what it meant to come together, where people worshiped God and they prayed, but it was more of a community gathering than the kind of picture that we normally have.
With rows.
People, rows of people, or coming to church, or coming to synagogue and praying or worshiping, but no sense of community. In Judaism, it was all one. They really combined together the spiritual and the physical, our experiences in our life with God and our experiences in our life with people are just as important. In fact, in the New Testament, it teaches us clearly that you cannot have one without the other. You cannot love God if you do not love your neighbor, you know. Anyway, thank you so much. If someone else would like to have a question or a comment for Sharona, there you go, Arthur. Let's see, I can open up your microphone there. Arthur, you have to unmute your mic.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Hi, Arthur.
Yeah, hi, Sharona, thanks for that. My question was about, you referenced 1 Chronicles 24. Is that Ezekiel, the actual Ezekiel who wrote the book Ezekiel?
No.
And also, am I correct in thinking that these 24 orders each lasted 2 weeks? Because I know that Zacchaeus, John the Baptist dad, was of the order of Abijah, the 8th order. So from that we can work out when John the Baptist was conceived, and when he was born sort of 9 months later, around about Passover, and therefore Jesus was born 6 months later, around about Tabernacles. So what week of the year would be the 20th week for Ezekiel?
Okay, so we know the name of the 24 shifts. They're written in ancient Jewish scripts, and we also found in Caesarea and in other places fragments of stones that have the shifts written inscribed on them. And they're very small fragments, but we can understand the whole list from what we know from writings. The Jewish year begins in the Jewish month of Nisan, which is more or less parallel to April. Okay, the first month of the Jewish year in biblical times is Nisan, and Passover is the first holiday, being on the 15th of that month. And when today we celebrate the New Year's 6 months later in the Jewish month of Tishrei, which is more or less parallel to September, but in biblical times it was referred to as the 7th month. So I must admit that I don't remember the 24 shifts by order. So you showed more knowledge here about than me about when Zechariah is. But it does make sense. It absolutely does make sense that his shift was in the beginning, towards Nisan, towards Passover. And yes, it's about 2 weeks for each shift. That brings us to 48 weeks out of the 52. Maybe it was not 2 weeks, maybe it was 15 days till the full moon, and then from the full moon to the end of the moon, and that would cover 12 months. Maybe that covers it more. We have a problem generally with the calendar, because the Jewish year is a lunar year. And so it's missing 11 days from the solar year. And more or less in the time of Jesus, that is where they made the Jewish calendar as we know today, that every 3 or 4 years we add a 13th month. Once again, I am not an expert enough to tell you who was the shift in the 13th month. I'm not sure of that. Yes.
Could I just with a supplementary one there? Have you ever heard of the Enoch calendar? Because some historians think that that was the calendar that was in place till Antiochus changed it in 167 BC.
George, let me just interrupt a second. I'd just like to point, George, you brought up what to me was also a very interesting discussion of determining the birth of the Messiah. And I did an article back in 2019. You could have a look here. And I kind of look into what you're talking about, the divisions, the 24 divisions of the priests in the temple, and with scriptures and so if you'd like to look into that more, or if others are you interested in that, how to follow the gospel's breadcrumbs to the birth of Jesus. You can find that as a members article on Israel Today. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, George. The calendar of Enoch, I never heard of that. What is that?
Well, if you go online and type it.
You'll have an echo. Is there any way you can make sure that you don't have an echo so we can understand you more clearly?
What about that? Is that a bit better? Yeah. So, well, I mean, if you Google Images and type the Enoch calendar, you'll find it there. And somebody's written an article on the internet about it. So it seemed to make sense, and but if you haven't heard about it, it's okay. I'll mute myself now, and I'll let the others have a go. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, David.
Go ahead, Paul. Unmute your mic, Paul.
There we are. Did you say the name of the chapel was
in Antum?
Put out into deep water.
Go into the depths.
Go into the depths.
Yes.
Ah, right. That's, for me, that's particularly interesting at the moment. We've been looking at Luke 5 in conjunction with John 21, the appearance of the resurrection. You don't know where the place on the Sea of Galilee was that Jesus appeared to the disciples when Peter was fishing.
After he resurrected, traditionally it is celebrated on the very, very north edge, in a place that is called Mensa Christi, the table of Jesus, where the priority of Peter, where he is told to be the first among the disciples. If you know, at the north side of the Sea of Galilee, there's the site of Tabcha, where the fish and the loaves miracle took place. And a little more east to that is the site where traditionally he appeared to them. But look, there's so much tradition going on one hand. On the other hand, you don't argue with tradition. Okay, so there are 22 kilometers of shore. Many of the stories you can tell at any specific spot, you know, and it would be as credible as any other. When it says specifically Kfar Nahum, Capernaum, it's specifically there. Where it says, but the Church of Beatitudes, the Protestants put one place and the Catholic put in another place. The miracle of taking the demons out of the pigs, where the pigs go running into the water. There are 3 different sites that are depending. So the water of the lake is holy wherever you go in.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, I'm going to call our meeting to a close now. I just want to really express my appreciation to all of you for joining us. Sharona has suggested that our next event like this will be about Caesarea. She's already been working on preparing that. So I hope that you will all be able to join us for that. Stay tuned to our website and our emails for information about that. Sharona, again, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It was fascinating and informative. Let's give a round of applause to Sharona. Thank you so much. There you go.
Good night,
Okay,
everyone.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.